Hello and welcome to RootsDiscovery.com. I'm your host, Mick. Today we crack the case of Frank Salley of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Now, for a starting point, what I have is that Frank Salley was buried at St. Dominic's on the 12th of January, 1928, and it lists that he was 65 years of age. So we're looking at 1862 or 1863 as his birth year. What we have here is the death certificate for Frank Salley. He died in the city's 41st Ward on 4950 St. Vincent Street. It states he was born on the 17th of April, 1862, was a sawmaker by trade, born in Philadelphia. His father was Patrick Salley of New York, mother Annie Campbell, and that Frank Salley died on the 9th of January, 1928. What I did was I plugged in those names for Frank Salley's parents, which was Patrick Salley and Ann Campbell. I came across this other death certificate for a Catherine McMullen, who just happened to be buried also at St. Dominic's. What we see, though, is that her parents are listed as Patrick Salley, not of New York, as it states in Frank's death certificate, but this Patrick Salley is stated to be of Ireland. It states that his mother, Ann Campbell, is the one that is from New York. Here we have the 1920 census of Philadelphia, which shows Frank Salley is living on 3850 St. Vincent Street. It states that he has a daughter named Caroline Ebeck, but it states that she is not married. However, we see that they also have another daughter named Ann Salley, who is also not married. So what this indicates to me is that perhaps the wife, Elizabeth Hund Salley, which is the wife of Frank, was married previously. This is the 1910 census of Philadelphia. Let's zoom in. What we see is that Frank Salley and his family are living on 7233 Wissanoming. What we can see here for the birth year for Frank Salley is that if he is truly 53, as he's stating here, then Frank Salley is a bit older than had been previously claimed on his death certificate and the 1920 census, because now we have him born around 1857. Here we are at the 1900 census of Philadelphia. This is 7168 Tacony. Frank Salley is listed as being born April of 1860. So now Frank Salley once again is getting younger. So let's move on from here. So here is the father of Frank Salley. This is Patrick Salley. What it states is that he is 51 years of age, with noticeably 60 years scratched off. It states he is married, died on the 23rd of February, 1890. It states he was born in Germany, which we know is not correct. He was born in Ireland. It states he was in the 12th Ward on 723 North 4th Street and is buried at New Cathedral. This is the burial for Patrick Salley. This took place at New Cathedral Cemetery in Philadelphia. I'll zoom in. What this shows is that Patrick Salley is listed as 60 years old. So this matches what was crossed off initially on his death certificate, where 60 was crossed out and 51 years of age was placed as his age. Now, for those that were alive in 1890 that served during the Civil War, there was actually a census conducted. This one was done in June of that year, and what it shows is that Ann Salley, Ann Campbell Salley, is stating that her husband Patrick was indeed in the Civil War. 4 rows from the bottom of the page, we can see that she was living at 732 North 4th Street, not 723 North 4th Street, which is what it said on Patrick Salley's death certificate. This reference card for Patrick Salley indeed shows that he was in the Civil War and was a private. I'm going to move on to the next slide so we can get more information. This is a listing showing some Civil War veterans in Philadelphia that had signed up We see Patrick Salley listed as 35 years old in 1862. So now we're looking at a birth date of approximately 1827. Well, this is a bit unfortunate, but in the 1880 census, I could not locate Patrick Salley in Philadelphia or anywhere for that matter. I had to go back to 1870, and what I can see here is that in the 5th Ward, Patrick Salley is listed as 45 years of age, a shoemaker by trade. His wife Annie is noticeably absent. His daughter Catherine is 17 years of age, which puts her at about 1853 for her birth year. Frank is now listed as 15 years of age in 1870, so this puts him at 1855. So again, he's getting older. There is also a son that appears to say Dennis and is 8 years of age, so he would have been born around 1862. What we're looking at here is the 17th Ward of Philadelphia, which is St. Michael's Parish. Let's zoom in. Patrick Salley is 28 years of age in 1860. So for whatever reason, he goes from 28 years of age in 1860 to 45 years of age in 1870. So we have this gap of being born in 1825 to 1832. We see that Anne is living with him. Catherine, her age jives with the 1853 year that we had from the previous census. The same is true of Frank, who is 1855 once again since he is 5. We also see that they had a daughter named Mary Ann who was 9 months during the time of this census, which was conducted in June of 1860. Now getting back to St. Michael's. St. Michael's was in chief settled by Irish Catholics that were up in the northern end of Ireland, which is now present-day Northern Ireland. And we can see that actually in some of the names we see here. Salley, McGuigan, MacAleer. These are names that you are going to find in Northern Ireland. What we're looking at here is the 1850 census of Philadelphia. Patrick Salley, who's listed as 20 years of age, a shoemaker, is living with Lawrence Quinn, also of Ireland, his wife Anne, and daughter Anne. Pay attention to that other shoemaker living with Patrick Salley. His name is John Junk. That surname Junk is almost exclusively found in County Tyrone. So let's look at this map. What this map shows is the different addresses that Patrick Salley lived at various years. Let's start off with in 1857, Frank Salley is living at 1324 Germantown Avenue within the parish of St. Michael's. 1860, he's at 1506 North Bodine Street, again in St. Michael's Parish. By 1867, he's moved a little bit northeast, and that is at St. Anne's Church. By 1874, he is at 253 North Front Street. By 1880, he's at 602 North Front Street. And finally, when he dies in 1890, he is at 732 North Front Street. Here we have the baptism for Frank Salley. This occurred on the 27th of April, 1855. It states that this Francis, or Frank, was born on the 7th, not the 17th as indicated on Frank's death certificate. What I'm not seeing here is the mother's maiden name. We do have that it says his father was Patrick Salley, but all it says for his mother is that her name was Anna. So what I'm going to do from here is look for his older sister, Catherine's baptism in 1853, and see if perhaps it lists Anna's maiden name. Here we have older sister Catherine's baptism. What it says is that she was born on the 26th of May, 1853. What we can clearly see here is that her father is listed as Patrick Salley and mother Anne Campbell. What we also see is that the second sponsor here, the godmother, is a Mary Salley. So how is this Mary Salley related to Father Patrick Salley. This we need to look into. Here are all the children for the family of Patrick Salley and Anne Campbell that I located at St. Michael's Parish. We established that Francis Salley, or Frank Salley, was born on the 7th of April, 1855. But what we're going to look at now is to see if there are any relatives sponsoring into this family. Well, we can see on the Campbell side there are a couple. But what are we looking for here? We're looking for Salleys. And what we see is there is a Mary Salley sponsoring his daughter, Catherine. So what we need to do here is figure out who this Mary is. So on the 3rd of August, 1845, Mary Salley marries James McGuire. This takes place at St. Michael's Parish. Therefore, it is undoubtedly a relative of Patrick Salley, given the fact Salley is not a common name, and the only area that I see them is in this parish of St. Michael's. This is 5 years later. This is the 1850 census of Philadelphia, and this is in the neighboring St. Anne's Parish. Now I'm going to zoom in here. What we see is James McGuire is there with his wife, Mary Salley, and right next door to them is a Francis Salley, 23 years old, a weaver, with his mother, Catherine, who's 50 years old. If we look here, Mary is 26 years old, so she would have been born approximately 1824. And if Francis Salley is her brother, he would have been born approximately 1827. So you have to wonder here whether or not the Francis is the brother of Patrick Salley, and if Mary McGuire is his sister. Now we have to take into account the first son born to Patrick was indeed a Francis or Frank, so perhaps this is a relative. I was curious as to who Francis Salley was, if indeed this was a brother to the Patrick Salley that we have in St. Michael's Parish. Well, we notice here that this Francis Salley apparently dies because this is his burial, and it's paid for by someone named Lawrence Bloomer. Now, I actually remembered seeing that name from that previous slide, and I'm going to bring that up again. Now, for whatever reason, the Lawrence Bloomer found at the top of this page, which is the 1850 census, right next to James McGuire and his wife Mary Salley, pays for the burial of presumably her brother Francis Salley. So one has to wonder whether or not Lawrence Bloomer is somehow related to this family. This is a death certificate for Francis Salley, who died on the 23rd of January, 1851. It states he was 24 years old, and he resided at Wood Street above Blair Street. Now, a review of the historical streets of Philadelphia shows that Wood Street is in fact what is today Susquehanna. This is a death certificate concerning a Ellen Paulson. Ellen Paulson was a daughter of Lawrence Bloomer and Bridget McGuire. So what we learned there is that Lawrence Bloomer's wife was probably the sister of James McGuire, husband of Mary Salley. Another thing I take notice of is that address of 2138 East Susquehanna. That's right near where Francis Salley had died in 1851. This death certificate is from 1916, so you're talking 65 years separation, and these people are in the same area. This is just a map showing the Patrick Salley addresses once again, but it's also showing who I think was his brother Francis Salley's address in 1851 when he died, and it shows that it was indeed right near St. Anne's Church. In 1850, we saw that Patrick Salley was living with a guy named Lawrence Quinn and his wife Anne. I wanted to figure out who this Lawrence Quinn was in case he was in some way related to Patrick Salley. So I'm going to zoom in here. This is the 1860 census of Philadelphia. This would be the 17th ward, and it shows Lawrence Quinn with his wife Annie, son Edward, son John, and a James Burke. This is the 1870 census of Philadelphia. I'm going to zoom in here. Here we see that Lawrence Quinn is now remarried to another woman named Mary, and the son John is there with him as well. But now we see that he's living with a James Donnelly, who has a brother named Michael and another named Mary. So I'm just curious, and that's all we're doing here is trying to figure out who he is. But for now, we'll just leave it at that. This is the 1880 census of Philadelphia. It's on 303 Jefferson Street. Let's zoom in. We see Lawrence Quinn with his wife Mary. Edward, the son, has rejoined, and so has daughter Anne by this point. So we're just, again, looking to see if there is perhaps a relationship between him and Patrick Salley. Now, I've put Lawrence Quinn on hold. I was trying to establish a relationship between him and Patrick Salley. Maybe there is none, but I'm just putting him on the back burner for now. And what I'm going to look at is Lawrence Bloomer, who, again, was the one that paid for Francis Salley's burial. Here is the 1860 census showing Lawrence Bloomer with his wife Bridget, and we'll continue on from there. Okay, this is the 19th ward again. It's just part 2 of that previous slide, and it just follows through with the offspring of Lawrence Bloomer, with John, Anna, Ellen, Lawrence, Francis, and Joseph. This is the 1870 census of Philadelphia. Here we have Lawrence Bloomer, once again, with wife Bridget and his offspring. Nothing really to report here. We're just seeing if we have some kind of relationship between him and Patrick Salley. This is the 1880 census of Philadelphia. It shows that Lawrence Bloomer is now living on 2006 Blair Street. But wait a minute. We see a Mary Donnelly living with Lawrence Bloomer. Now, is it possible this Mary Donnelly was the same Mary Donnelly living with Lawrence Quinn 10 years prior to this record? This we have to look into. Unfortunately, those early census records do not give you the address where the people were living. So what I'm doing here is I'm looking at the directories. This shows Lawrence Quinn in 1867, a Mason living on 1439 Germantown Avenue. What we learn here is that Mary Donnelly was indeed living with Lawrence Quinn at 1439 Germantown Avenue. What we also learn here is that she was the widow of Edward Donnelly. Mary Donnelly was linked to Lawrence Quinn at 1439 Germantown Avenue. That is the same man who was living with Patrick Salley in 1850. Here we have Mary Donnelly, the same woman that was with Lawrence Quinn, widow of Edward, living on 2006 Blair Street. Why is this significant? Because this ties her into the same address as Lawrence Bloomer. Again, who is Lawrence Bloomer? Lawrence Bloomer paid for Francis Salley's burial. Well, here he is, matching Mary Donnelly's address at 2006 Blair. Mary Donnelly was tied into Lawrence Quinn on the 1870 census because she is living with him. Lawrence Quinn was living with Patrick Salley in 1850, so what this shows is that there is a definite relationship between Francis Salley and Patrick Salley, and it is my belief that they are brothers. Here is our link, Mary Donnelly, which links Patrick Salley to Francis Salley. Mary Donnelly in 1870 is living with Lawrence Quinn. This is the same individual that Patrick Salley was living with in 1850. If we look at Lawrence Bloomer, he is the individual that paid for Francis Salley's burial in 1851. Mary Donnelly moves in with him at 2006 Blair Street in 1880. This links Patrick Salley to Francis Salley, and therefore I believe that Francis Salley was the older brother of Patrick Salley. This is New Cathedral Cemetery. On the 16th of July, 1884, Mary Donnelly is buried. Her burial site was Section R, Range 9, Lot 26. From New Cathedral Cemetery, on the 26th of October, 1897, they bury Lawrence Bloomer. He is buried at Section R, Range 9, Lot 26, and this matches the burial site for Mary Donnelly. Now, if we remember, Lawrence Bloomer pays for the burial for Francis Salley back in 1851. 20 years later, Mary Salley McGuire is buried on the 29th of September, 1871. And what we can see here from St. Michael's is that Lawrence Bloomer, once again, is paying for the burial of a Salley. Why is he doing this? Is he something more to them than meets the eye? So how do we figure out where the Salleys came from in Ireland? Well, if we look at the parish that he settled at, which is St. Michael's, a lot of the people there are from like Derry, Tyrone, Armagh, from those more northern areas of Ireland. But if we look at the neighbors like Bloomer, McGuire, again, you're looking at those more northern areas. But Bloomer is a very uncommon name, just like Salley. And when I looked that up, it seems like it's very common in Tyrone. So if Lawrence Bloomer is related to Patrick Salley, then I'm thinking that there should be overlap between that surname and Salley in Ireland. And when I looked at Ireland again, Tyrone is where I find overlap between Bloomer and Salley. Before we go into Ireland and check the marriage and baptisms for the Salley family, let's think about what we have thus far in Philadelphia. Well, the mother's name is Catherine. We know that because she was living with Francis Salley in 1850. Mary Salley, who married James McGuire, appears to have been the oldest, born around 1824. Francis Salley, the only birth date we were given is loosely around 1827 as his year of birth. Patrick Salley is a bit tricky because he is found in several census records and they vary from 1825 to 1832. When we saw the Civil War record, he claimed to have been born around 1827. So where does that leave us? Well, I would suspect that those early census records are probably going to be the closest we'll get, and perhaps that Civil War record. So give him around 1827 to 1830 for the estimate of his year of birth. Success. This map represents the area that I found Patrick Salley and his family in Ireland. What I'm going to do over the next few slides is show you where I have found the evidence. This information comes from the parish of Tullyallen in Dungannon, County Tyrone. What we see here is that on the 28th of October 1819, a Neil Salley marries a Catherine Bloomer. On the 18th of July 1821, their daughter Margaret is born. On the 17th of August 1823, a Mary is born. Is that Mary McGuire? On the 21st of August 1825, they have a son, Francis. Is that the son, Francis, that died in 1851 in Philadelphia? Then finally, on the 13th of April 1828, a son named Patrick is born. What we see from the bottom there is that on the 26th of June 1831, Neil Salley dies at a place called Fashglasha Road. Here is the actual marriage for Neil Salley and Catherine Bloomer. Here we find the baptism for daughter Margaret. This is the baptism for daughter Mary, born to Neil Salley and Catherine Bloomer. Here is son Francis Salley and his baptism, but it shows that his father is Neil Salley, but his mother is listed as Sarah, not Catherine. I think this is just a mistake, and we see this sometimes in these baptisms from Ireland where the priest would just jumble the names of the sponsors and the parents. That would happen once in a while. But take note of the sponsor here, which is actually Thaddeus, but it's actually just Tim Loughran. Here at the very bottom we see Patrick Salley, his baptism to Neil Salley and his wife Catherine Bloomer. For the sponsor, matching Francis Salley's baptism, was Tim Loughran, and here he is again doing the same thing for son Patrick Salley. This church register shows the obituary for Neil Salley, and what it shows is he was living at Fashclasha, which is Fashclasha Road. Because of the fact that I found a Margaret Salley in the family of Neil Salley and Catherine Bloomer, I then went back into the Philadelphia church records to see if there was perhaps a Margaret Salley. I was successful in locating her. She was married to a Patrick McChrystal, and they were married at Old St. Joseph. However, they used St. Michael's for their children's baptisms. Starts off with John, who dies, then Mary Ann, and then their second son named John, and then a Margaret. Here is more information on the McGuire family. What we can see here is that Patrick Salley sponsors their daughter Anne in 1849. We should also pay attention to here is the fact that Lawrence Bloomer sponsors their son Ed in 1862. On my quest to find Salleys at this church of Tullyallen, I noticed there was a Lawrence Quinn baptized in 1819 to a John Quinn and an Anna Bloomer. So what we can conclude there is that this Lawrence Quinn was most likely a cousin to Patrick Salley. So the Lawrence Bloomer that paid for the graves of the two Salley children, I was looking for his baptism, but the problem here is that I think that he was born before the registers begin, so I was unsuccessful in locating Lawrence Bloomer. But I noticed this marriage here. This was for another Lawrence Bloomer. He marries an Isabella Herson. But take a look at the witnesses to this marriage. John Quinn and Neil Salley. The conclusion is that Frank Salley was born on the 7th of April, 1855 in Philadelphia. His parents were Patrick Salley and Ann Campbell. Patrick Salley came from Fashclasha in the parish of Tullyallen, County Tyrone, and he would have been born around the 13th of April, 1828. Patrick Salley's parents were Neil Salley and Catherine Bloomer. If you would like help with your Irish roots, visit me at www.rootsdiscovery.com. This has been your host, Mick, and I just cracked the case.